Welcome back and thank you very much for joining me. My name is Swadik Mayanja and I am Q the Nurse. And on this channel I bring you fun topics, research, news, current events for you nurses everywhere. And today we are going to talk about the State of the Union. Was Trump telling the truth? Was he lying? Am I happy about it? Am I sad? Did I expect it? What was it? This is the State of the Union, and I'm specifically going to talk about healthcare. I'm not going to go off the rails and talk about the economy or trade or immigration, which, you know, immigration is important, and I think he fucked up the worst there. But I'm going to stick to healthcare. And we're going to talk about the State of the Union, the address that Trump actually gave. Then we're also going to talk Joe Kennedy and Bernie Sanders, and that's we'll try to end on a high note. Go Bernie.
You'll be doing things you don't like doing in order to go on living, that is, to go on doing things you don't like doing, which is stupid. Better to have a short life that is full of what you like doing than a long life spent in a miserable way.
Hey. So anyways, just generally about the entire State of the Union, the actual address, easily the most polished I've ever seen Trump ever. In any speech, in any rally that he's ever had, this is the most polished. It sounds, it looked. He wasn't as lively. He didn't have all his tremendous, all of that language that he used. Big Lee, I'm the coolest of the baddest, the greatest ever. He used some of it, but not as much. He definitely stuck to the prompters as much as possible. And then on top of that, it just wasn't as fun, right? I was falling asleep halfway through it. It also lasted an hour and 40 minutes or something crazy. And then just to clear the air prior to me getting into this, I just want to check my bias here. So obviously, I am not for Trump. I don't support him. I don't like him. I really kind of despise the man. But I really tried my hardest to just go straight objective, watch the actual speech. I did watch the Young Turks response video, to analyze it. But then I also listened to Siri literally read the transcript because I can't watch Trump talk that long. I was falling asleep / I wanted to throw my computer out the window. And then, so let's just jump in. So there were three major healthcare he didn't talk about healthcare a lot, but he did talk about three things that, that would affect us nurses the most. So the first thing I want to talk about is Trump and how he said that he repealed the Obamacare mandate, that everyone has to have insurance. Let's see actually what he said, and then we'll see what the truth is. So what he said during the address, he said, we eliminated an especially cruel tax that fell mostly on Americans making less than $50,000 a year, forcing them to pay tremendous penalties simply because they could not afford government-ordered health plans. We repealed the core of disastrous Obamacare. The individual mandate is now gone. So on the surface, yes, he's correct. The mandate is no longer. If you don't want health insurance, depending on what state you are, you don't have to have it. But let's get a little bit of context here, right? Because the truth is, according to experts, that the elimination of this mandate will bump up premiums in the very near future, if not already, will bump up premiums through the roof, and will obviously cause a lot more Americans to lose health insurance. So the Congressional Budget Office estimates that 13 million people would lose coverage if the individual mandate were repealed, and the premiums in the individual market would rise by an additional 10%. The mandate's repeal could also drive some insurers out of the market at a time when some parts of the country have already been at risk of having no insurers to sell plans through the ACA marketplace. I think this is horrible. I mean, when people come off health insurance, it's not a win, right? I know the Trump and the Republican Party love saying it's the person's right, but no one knows what actually happens. Right? No one knows what actually happens in life. You don't know if tomorrow you're gonna walk out and you're gonna get hit by a truck. You don't know if you're just gonna fall ill with cancer. All of these crazy things can happen. So when 13 million people are coming off health insurance and the entire Republican Party stands up and claps for Trump, it's like, no, this is a problem. This is not something we should be clapping. Okay? He goes on. So number two, the second thing that he mentioned, and these are real brief. The sentences I'm reading is like all he said when it comes to healthcare, nothing more. So he goes on, my administration is committed to fighting drug epidemic and helping get treatment for those in need. For those who have been so terribly hurt, the struggle will be long and it will be difficult, as Americans always do. In the end, we will succeed. We will prevail. I mean, it's super general, no specifics, no plans, nothing has actually happened, and that's what the experts have all concluded there has been no forward movement on this issue since Trump has been in power. It's been a full year. I know he talked about this during his campaign, but nothing has happened. Nothing. Zero. So there has been no move by Trump's administration to actually spend more money on the opioid crisis. Key positions in the administration remain unfilled, even without nominees in the case of the White House Drug Czar Office and Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA. And I'm kind of surprised that Trump hasn't done anything about this situation, because it would be a win-win. This is something that everyone wants to happen, and the war on drugs is something I'm totally against. He still hasn't nominated anyone to be the drug czar of the White House, so I'm against the war on drugs. I am totally for fighting against this opioid crisis, but he hasn't done anything for it. This is something, like, I feel like it's outside party lines. If he does it, it's a win no matter what. Healthcare is always out. I feel like everyone wants the same thing. Everyone wants people to be healthy. So if he did anything towards that goal, it would be a win for everybody, right? And credit where credit's due. If Trump does something positive for the healthcare, I'm all for it. The problem is, the only thing he has done, and the only thing that he thinks is great, is get people off of healthcare and say, oh, you have the option if you want to pay $1 million for healthcare, and then everyone claps for him. It's like, stop. It's bullshit. It's bullshit. It's bullshit. And then lastly, the third thing I'd like to talk about is how Trump abandoned his entire rah-rah on the campaign trail, and he's saying that we are going to fight these pharmaceutical companies. We are going to tear them down. We are going against them. They're taking advantage of all the American people. Sure, I guess I'm for it. I love what you're saying. What are you going to do about it? So what he said was, one of my greatest priorities is to reduce the price of prescription drugs. In many other countries, these drugs cost far less than what we pay in the United States. That is why I have directed my administration to make fixing the injustice of high drug prices one of our top priorities. Prices will come down. Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. I can't say much about this because it's the very same thing as the opioid crisis. He hasn't done anything about it. Zero. He hasn't done anything about it. It's not like he has any legislation out that's going to say you can buy drugs from other countries, like across the border from Canada, because obviously pharmaceutical companies have been jacking up the goddamn prices here in America, and since it's come in office, it's not like they slowed down or stopped, and it's been the status quo that the pharmaceutical companies can do what they want with the prices of drugs. It's insanity. So experts say that in the first year of Trump's presidency, the drug industry has gained the upper hand in the lobbying campaign against its foes in the healthcare industry. Under Trump, drug companies have undertaken a concerted campaign to shift the discussion about drug prices to a conversation about out-of-pocket costs, in which health insurers and pharmacy benefits managers are under the microscope. The company's campaign appears to have borne fruit, judging by regulatory changes being pursued by the Trump administration on Medicare. Trump has also filled the executive branch with officials closely tied to the drug industry, his new pick to lead health and human services. So yeah, it's bullshit. So the only thing that he's trying to do is, instead of actually telling these pharmaceutical companies, you are not allowed to raise these drug prices to $1 million a pill, and then go ahead and sell it in Canada and in Mexico and anywhere else for $50 a pill. Instead of doing that, he's actually saying, no, it's in fact, we should make sure that Medicare and the insurance companies pay $1 million, and then your out-of-pocket cost will be less or the same, right? But that only makes insurance prices higher, and that only makes healthcare prices go through the roof, right? The insurance companies are not going to be wanting to pay for all these medications, and the pharmaceutical companies don't give a shit who pays for it as long as they get the money. So if the pharmaceutical companies make Tylenol $1 million, the health insurance companies has to pay for 80% of that. Your health insurance is going to cost $1 million. It's just that simple. The money has to come from somewhere, and at the end of the day, it's coming from you. So if you just tell them you can't raise those prices, they won't raise those prices through the goddamn roof, right? And that's literally the three main things he talked about when it comes to healthcare. Nothing more, nothing less. It's just, that's it. That's it. What did I feel like the address was? I can't blame him. I know where my biases lie, right? So I understand that I'm looking at Trump and everything he does under a microscope. I'm picking every bad thing that he does and magnifying it, right? But some of these things are just, you know, they're huge, huge flaws. 13 million people off of health insurance is a humongous flaw. That's not something you can just hide and say, oh no, I'm just picking, right? And at the end of the day, one of the things I really, 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 really disliked about the entire speech in general is every time he made a claim or like, oh yeah, the immigration issues, and then he looked at the family and he made like us feel bad for a family that lost a daughter, I think, through MS-13, and it was a gang, and that gang killed one of these family's daughters. And it's like, oh my goodness, that's really sad. And then after you hear that entire story and you say, oh, I feel for that family, he then goes and says, we need to stop letting these people in the country. And he's just clumping all of these immigrants in the same group as MS-13. First time I've heard of MS-13 was yesterday listening to the goddamn address, and now all of a sudden all the immigrants in the whole world that come from the countries he doesn't like are part of this, and we need to stop it, and we need to give more money to ICE, and we need to give more money to people getting deported. It's just everything that he wanted to do. All of his policies were shielded by families that are actual victims, shielded by the American flag, by veterans, and I know it happens on both sides, but it was just demagogue at its finest when you were watching that. It was gross. It was gross. It was gross. And I really, really dislike that. So let's talk about Joe Kennedy and the Democrats' response to the State of the Union address. He did all right. Joe Kennedy, welcome to the Democratic Party. The speech was fine. The speech was fine. I'm just seeing a lot right now, the immediate responses from people, and people are loving it. And sure, my thing with him is he said all the right things, but he sounded like such a politician. I don't know if I believe him. And when I say sounded like a politician, is what I'm trying to say is everything he said I agree with, but I don't know if he agrees with it, or he just got that speech literally an hour before and read it like a politician would read it. And if you don't, just watch how he pauses in these sentences, and it's not natural. It doesn't sound authentic. Just you watch.
Angry, afraid. We all feel the fractured fault lines across our country. We hear the voices of Americans who are forgotten and feel forsaken.
So as you can see, he sounds super polished with all these crazy long pauses, and I know you have to wait for the claps, and that's how, you know, public speaking is supposed to be done, but like I said, I don't feel it. I hear it, I agree with it, but I don't feel it. And I know that's asking for much. So I'm not putting him down. I'm not putting him down. I'm just telling you that speech, that response, super generic, number one. Number two, he doesn't actually talk about the State of the Union address. He says nothing specific about the address. This speech could have been written a week ago. I don't know what speech is talking about. If I didn't watch the State of the Union address, this would have been a great speech. But I'm like, okay. What about the actual State of the Union address are you talking about here? This is just general, really, really big picture stuff. No details, no comebacks, no what Trump said here was wrong and this is what we're going to do about it. It's just general spewing of randomness. And I think the most specific thing that he talked about is the one thing that I absolutely loved. And that thing was that argument he made about how the Republicans and Trump specifically are trying to pit Americans together. I'm trying to pit, people from the cities to the people in the suburbs, to the people in the Midwest, right, in rural areas. Trying to pit, the rich for the poor, trying to pit just Americans, different races, different cultures against one another. I thought that was his greatest moment, and just watch it, and I really did. That was the one time I was like, thank you. So here.
We are bombarded with one false choice after another. Coal miners or single moms. Rural communities or inner cities. The coast or the heartland. As if the mechanic in Pittsburgh, a teacher in Tulsa, and a daycare worker in Birmingham are bitter rivals, rather than mutual casualties of a system forcefully rigged towards those at the top. As if the parent who lies awake, terrified that their transgender son or daughter will be beaten and bullied at school, is any more or less legitimate than a parent whose heart is shattered by a daughter in the grips of an opioid addiction. So here is the answer that Democrats offer tonight. We choose both.
So I love that. But at the end of the day, he did not propose any policy. He did not specifically mention anything that Trump said throughout the address. It was super generic. He sounded like a really bland. No, that's a lie. It's not bland. He's a good politician, but he would be a good politician if he wasn't compared to politicians like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, like Obama, really, because Obama was a great speaker, right? If Obama had this speech, it would have sounded a lot better, and that's just the truth. He was a better speaker than Joe Kennedy is. Joe Kennedy is young, he's new, I'm happy he's on my team, I'm happy he's on my side. The bottom line is, I just don't think I agree with him. I don't believe I agree with it. I agree with everything he says. I just don't believe him. I don't feel the authenticity. It's not real. It's just words. Because I've heard millions and millions and millions and millions of politicians say the same damn shit he's saying. All day, every day. That's all they say until they actually get in office and they do jack shit. That is my point. I don't believe that he's going to go into office and fight, tooth and nail for these things to actually come true. Super generic, no policy, and I don't believe him yet. Moving forward, if he goes on to fight like this throughout his entire career as a politician, I'm ready to jump on that Joe Kennedy train. But until then, he just sounds like another politician that was given a really good speech to read. Congratulations, Joe. I love it, Mr. Kennedy. I love it. I love it. I really hope it's real, but we'll find out. So ending on a really high note, Mr. Bernie Sanders and his response. Everything I said about Joe is the exact opposite here. In fact, Bernie Sanders gets into super detailed viewpoints against the things that Donald Trump actually said at the State of the Union address. Not just random things that I love hearing from politicians, that I love hearing from people, but actual specific things and what we should do versus what we have, what's going on now or what we're trying to do. Okay? And that's just, if you've watched me in any of my actual videos, you know I'm the biggest Bernie bro. I'm the biggest Bernie supporter ever. I love the man. He's like my definition of a perfect politician. Of course, in this response, he mentions my favorite Bernie Sanders healthcare quote, and I have to say, these candidates understand that the United States has got to join the rest of the industrialized world and guarantee healthcare to all as a right, not a privilege, through a Medicare for all single payer program, and that is goddammit the truth. And I recently did a review, NurseFlix review of Medicare for all. Please watch that video. It's super in depth, goes into super details of what's going on and how we can change it. And he actually, and this is the thing, he goes on and he actually talks about what they said in the State of the Union address, and just not just saying the right thing. He goes on by saying, many of you will recall that during his campaign, Donald Trump told the American people how he was going to provide health insurance for everybody with much lower deductibles. That is what he promised working families across the country during his campaign. But as president, he did exactly the opposite. And then he goes on to more detail, and you can see the video for yourself.
Last year, he supported legislation that would have thrown up to 32 million people off of the health care they had, while at the same time substantially raising premiums for older Americans. The reality is that although we were able to beat back Trump's effort to repeal the Affordable Care Act, 3 million fewer Americans have health insurance today than before Trump took office.
Like, it's that, I don't want to say it's that simple, right? But, like, he's actually responding to the address, right? The Joe Kennedy video and the Bernie Sanders video were both responses to the State of the Union address. But if you just listen to the Joe Kennedy speech response, you'd be like, I don't know which speech of Trump's you're actually talking about. Where here, Bernie Sanders says, this is what Trump said. This is the actual truth. He said that he was going to make healthcare better for all of us with lower deductibles, but the truth is 3 million people, 3 million less people are insured today than there were before he came into office. It's ridiculous. I absolutely love it. And then he goes on to talk about how Trump has turned his back, and when he promised during his campaign, we will not touch Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security, he quickly turned his back on that promise, and here Bernie comes again swinging.
As you all recall, during his campaign, Trump promised not to cut Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid. That is what he promised. As president, however, he supported a Republican budget resolution that proposed slashing Medicaid by $1 trillion and cutting Medicare by $500 billion. Further, President Trump's own budget called for cutting Social Security disability insurance by $64 billion.
Nothing more to say about that. I mean, I love it because I don't know if politicians or, you know, these public relations people say, don't get into the details because it's going to turn people off. But we need to hear the details. We need to hear the details. We need the context. We need to know the actual numbers and how it's affecting us day to day, right? So when people are just like, yeah, I did what I promised I was going to say. When Trump says, yeah, I did what I promised I was going to say and not touch Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security. And people are like, oh, great. Sure. We believe you. Bernie's like, no, that's bullshit. You took $500 billion from Medicare, $1 trillion cutting from Medicaid, and $64 billion from disability insurance. That is humongous. Those are human lives. These are people, these are citizens of America that depend on these services, these government programs, to live a healthy life. And all this money has been taken away. Their insurance is going to go skyrocketing. And most of this stuff goes to vulnerable populations, the elderly, who are retired, who can't work, who don't have the health they used to when they were younger, and those who are disabled. So when Bernie Sanders poses these, when he actually talks about the actual numbers and you hear it and say this is bullshit and this is what's actually happening when Trump says we're better at healthcare, you're like, yeah, Trump, that's fucking bullshit. Where if you just say, where Trump just says something like, I made my promises, healthcare is better, and then the Democrats are like, no, it's not, you don't know who to believe. Bernie gets into the details and he tells it as it is. He doesn't bullshit you. He says what we should do. He tells you how shitty the situation is now and how we should move forward. Lastly, he talks about the drugs and the pharmaceutical companies and how they have affected us. How Trump said that he was going to do something about it, but in reality, he hasn't done jack shit about it.
Trump spoke about how other countries' drugs cost far less, yet he has done nothing to allow Americans to purchase less expensive prescription drugs from abroad or to require Medicare to negotiate drug prices, which he promised he would do when he ran for president.
And just a little bit more, he goes on by saying, but as President Trump nominated Alex Azar, a former executive of the Eli Lilly Company, one of the largest drug companies in this country, to head up the Department of Health and Human Services. The same person who gained all of his wealth from literally just raising prices on drugs hundreds and thousands of %, just so he can have a fatter wallet, fatter profit margins, all of this craziness, is the head of the Health and Human Services in Trump's administration. When you know these things, when you have a politician that's actually speaking truth to power, when he stands up and he says, this is a lie, what you're saying is it's all lies, and this is the truth, and these are the facts, and these are the numbers, it is super refreshing. Because then you actually believe the candidate. You actually believe the person who's talking to you. They did their homework. They're fighting for you as an American citizen, as a nurse, as a healthcare provider. And they want a better tomorrow, not just more money and more profits. So that is the State of the Union address. Obviously, like I said, I tried to check my biases and I tried to look at this the most objectively as possible. But the truth is the truth is the truth is the truth. As a nurse, I can't be supportive of anything Trump has done when it comes to healthcare at all. At all. Okay? So thank you guys for watching, sticking around. Please like, comment, and in the comments, please tell me, what did you think about any of these responses? What did you think about Bernie Sanders' response and how he actually brought the numbers, the facts, and said this is what we need to do, and this is how you fucked up, and this is how you lied to us since the election campaign. This is what you're not doing, this is what you are doing, and this is what we should do. Well, please tell me what you think about that. I absolutely loved it. I can't get enough of it. Tell me how you feel about Joe Kennedy. Are you excited? Do you think he's going to be the next, face of the Democratic Party? And then last but not least, what did you feel about Trump's response? What did you feel about Trump's speech, the address, State of the Union, when it comes specifically to healthcare? Deuces.